US dollar falling.
Declining dollar is great. No, it isn't.
It is the default currency for global trade. Most countries depend on the dollar, and now China wants to change that.
BRICS nations are planning to develop a new global payment system.
Why are countries making relentless effort to escape US dollar? And why, despite all the effort, US dollar is still dominating? In order to understand, firstly, we have to understand how the dollar became so powerful. This is the story dates back to 1944, an agreement which became first historic reason for the US dollar dominance. It was a Bretton Woods Agreement. During the Second World War, where the entire Europe and Asia was fighting, the United States served as supplier of the Allied powers, providing weapons, machinery, and other essential goods. Since paper currency is worthless during the war, entire countries paid US in gold. By the end of Second World War, US was the owner of majority of the gold, approximately 2/3 of the world's monetary gold stock. As of now, transaction cannot be done in gold because there is no gold, and it is just a post-war, so any local currency cannot be trusted. So there was a need of a global financial system, a global currency on which everyone can trust. What next? Delegates from 44 countries like United States, Canada, Western European countries, and Australia met in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire. Famous British economist John Maynard Keynes was on side of developing a new global currency, while US Treasury official Harry Dexter White proposed to go with a US dollar as a global currency. Delegates from 44 countries voted, and guess who won? The United States. And the name given to this system was Bretton Woods system. In this system, countries peg, that is, fix their currency exchange rate in terms of dollar. For example, 1 British pound equals to 4.03 US dollars, 360 Japanese yen equal to 1 US dollar, and these dollars will have a gold backing, that is, 35 US dollars equal to 1 ounce of gold, which means any government or central bank can demand gold for their dollars. Now you must be wondering why no government printed unlimited amount of their local currency, converted it into US dollar at a fixed exchange rate, and asked all the gold from the United States. Well, it was not that simple. Printing local currency was not equal to US dollar. A country need to export goods to the other countries in order to have gold. If not, they need to take loan from IMF. This is how US dollar became world's reserve currency, because US dollar was a new gold. Until now, the world's obsession was with a gold reserve, and it shifted to US dollar reserve. Countries started to invest in the US economy, began buying US Treasury securities. Result, US kept printing dollars for the massive domestic programs, and by 1960, US GDP accounted for nearly half of the world's GDP, according to World Bank. On the other hand, US market flooded with the paper currency as there was a deficit spending. The world showed their concern, accusing US for massive military engagement and funding war. Vietnam War was one of the prominent examples. Confidence in the dollar's convertibility to the gold began to erode during 1960s as foreign central banks accumulated increasing amount of dollars far exceeding US gold supply. There was a concern about US ability to honor dollar to gold conversion. Countries began converting dollars into gold. If this continued, there will be no gold left in the United States. What next? On 1971, President Richard Nixon suspended dollar's convertibility to the gold. And by 1976, US formally removed all ties between US dollar and the gold, marking the end of Bretton Woods system.
I have directed Secretary Connally to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserve assets.
Now logic says US dollar would have collapsed, countries would have stopped doing trade in dollars. But you will be shocked to know that the US dollar became more stronger. And the reason behind this was something called petrodollar. In early 1970s, two things were most important. First, oil was the most needed commodity. Country needed it at any cost for the development. Second, securities. Country with resources had always a fear of invasion and intervention. In early 1970s, both came together. That is, the world saw oil crisis and the country saw biggest threat at the same time. On 1973, Egypt and Syria attacked Israel. The United States came in support of Israel and provided military supplies worth $2.2 billion. This wasn't lacked by Arab nation at all. Organization for Petroleum Exporting countries. OPEC was led by Saudi King Faisal Saud, and he retaliated, imposed an oil embargo. That is, OPEC stopped shipping oil to the United States and other allies of Israel. What next? The oil prices surged by 3 times, from $3 per barrel to $12 per barrel. This led oil crisis in the United States and all across. On the other hand, for the decades, British Army was the protector of Persian Gulf. That is, countries like Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Qatar, Oman, and the UAE were protected. But on 1971, British Army was withdrawn, which left Middle East in a power vacuum, and Arab nationalization was rising. Arab nationalization was a movement to unite the Arab nations which have a common language and common history, so that there will be no more colonizations and there will be no foreign power dominance. But Saudi Arabia was an absolute monarchy, which is even today. The king felt threatened that the regime will collapse without superpower support. Guess what? On 1974, Saudi Arabia and the United States did an agreement for 50 years, in which the United States will provide military protections and modern weapons to the Saudi Arabia, which was needed for the regime's survival. On the other hand, Saudi Arabia will sell its oil in dollars.
The petrodollar system came in after US went off the gold standards. The deal was set up joint commissions for economic cooperation and Saudi Arabia's military needs. In exchange for guaranteeing the security of the Saudi regime and providing military aid, Saudi Arabia agreed to price its oil exports exclusively in US dollars.
Saudi Arabia was a leading oil producer, so other member of OPEC left with no option apart from following Saudi Arabia and selling its oil in dollars. This is how the world continued to reserve dollar. If this is very clear to you, let's get back to our questions. First, why do countries making relentless effort to escape US dollar? It is because for the world, dollar is not just a currency but the biggest weapons of United States. Here is how. US can freeze the dollar reserve of any currency, making that country impossible to trade and collapse the financial system of that country. Let's understand it by example. Suppose a country is in war. The world would not trust the national currency of that country, so the trade can only be done through the stable foreign currency, let's say dollar. That country has billions of dollars in the US securities and US Federal Reserve. But in the name of sanctions, what if US government will freeze that assets? Here, that country will be not able to use its own money, its own assets. Wait, this was not a hypothetical example. In 2022, when the Russia-Ukraine war started, US and its allies froze $300 billion reserve of Russian central bank. Another prominent reason, it gives United States the biggest superpower of unlimited debt and to trade in deficit. Today, every country buy US bond and other securities. US carry the massive development program from the money across the globe. And this is why you often hear US run on debt. And this forces countries to look for the alternatives to the dollar. And this is how it is happening. Countries are already started looking for the common new currency, BRICS to develop a new currency, and countries are doing trade in local currency. China is settling energy and trade deals in yuan with several partners, including Russia, Iran, and some Middle Eastern countries and Latin American countries. Alongside this, India and the UAE trade in rupees and dirhams, while India and Russia uses rupees and rubles. Countries are dumping dollars, alternative blocks like BRICS is rising, local currency are being promoted. So dollar must be in trouble, right? Well, not really. Even today, 89% of the foreign exchange transactions are settled in US dollar, and 56 to 60% of central bank reserves are in dollars globally. The question is why? US dollar is still dominating even after 80 years. The simple one-line answer is the world has not found a viable alternatives to dollar yet. When we say alternatives to the dollar, what are the options that the world is left with? First, just like the US dollar, making any country's currency a new global currency. Second, developing a new common currency just like the BRICS is trying. And third, every country just start doing trade in their local currency. But for now, all of them comes with a heavy cost and problems. Option 1, making any country's currency a global currency. Well, with this, the fundamental problem will remain same. We are criticizing US because it weaponizes it and it gives US the exorbitant privilege. it will do same to the another country. So there is no point of moving from the largest, most stable, transparent and liquid economy, at least compared to the rest of the world. Option 2, a new global currency. When we talk about a new global currency, we talk about euro or something totally new like BRICS currency, the unit. The fundamental problem that lies with euro is it is fragmented with 20 countries with no unified fiscal policy, which means any changes in any government of these 20 countries and their fiscal policy will make world think twice before investing in euro. One sanctions by the US and the entire Europe goes silent. Most of the time they do not even dare to criticize strongly. The simple message that goes to the world is the US system is equal to euro system, while the BRICS currency only exists on paper with no proper system. Now the final option, doing trade in local currency. Even though it sounds right on the paper, when you hear India, China and Russia settling trade in rupees, yuan and rubles, economically it creates more complex problem. Here is how. Suppose India purchases Russian oil and pays in rupees instead of dollars. After a few months, Russia will have billions of Indian rupees. So what can Russia do with that Indian rupees? First, it can buy Indian goods. Second, it can invest into Indian market. And third, it can convert it into another currency. But what if India's exports are not big enough to absorb the billions of rupees and rupees cannot be converted freely? Now Russia cannot use its own hard-earned money. So this will again lead to the same system. Next time Russia will accept rupees to a certain limit or partly and demand rest payment in dollars, gold or other foreign currency. Does this mean US dollar will remain dominant forever? Well, the history says no. The world moved from Dutch guilder to pound sterling and probably will move one day from dollars too. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next.